Welcome to Let's Have a Cuppa. My name is Anna Knob, and every week I sit down and chat with one of my friends and talk about just some of the things that make them awesome. So grab a cuppa. This week we'll be talking about human trafficking. So just be aware, we're not going to be getting into the nitty gritty things, but just in case you have little ears around and questions. But allow me to introduce you to my friend. She's a wife, a mama, and truly one of the most driven women I know, Jordan Pine.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. It's exciting to be here with you.
Yeah, I when I first decided to do the podcast, you were absolutely at the top of list of people that I needed to talk to, because our common thread is not just that we went to church together, but we worked together in anti-human trafficking. And I say worked, but it still continues. We definitely do
Yep.
stuff together. And we work in anti-human trafficking here in central Pennsylvania. I always
Okay.
have to distinguish that one because it confuses people.
Oh man,
Um,
that's a good one.
yeah. And so we're going to start at the beginning here with you a little bit. You went to college at Messiah,
Yeah,
which most Pennsylvanians are probably familiar with. And what did you go for?
I did. So I studied politics and then minored in criminal justice. And then, yeah, so that's actually where I met my husband, and Messiah has just a lot of history for us.
Yeah, yeah. Did you always know that you wanted to work in the anti-human trafficking realm? Because a lot of people probably would think maybe social work or psychology and going that direction, but you obviously didn't.
Yeah, took a little bit of a different route. So I did. There was always this passion to combat human trafficking. It actually started for me when I was uh, as I look back, I think it was about eighth grade, maybe seventh or eighth grade. So somewhere in middle school, and was attending a youth conference. And I'll never forget that there were these missionaries from India that were there.
Yeah.
And as they were sharing about this issue that they were working on in their village, they were discussing just how they would be in the marketplace and they would see children that would be at the side of the road. And, unlike what we see in the United States, and I think it's important to recognize that trafficking the concept is the same, but methods are
Okay.
very different in different locations and countries.
Yeah.
And Anna, you're well aware of this, but putting this out there for others. And so in this village in India where these missionaries were serving, it was not uncommon for a family to sell a child to put food on the table. And so to break that child's spirit, what was often done in that particular area was these children would be chained up and sometimes put in cages, and just some of the most barbaric methods used.
Yeah.
Now, the missionaries explained this in a very age appropriate way, but it
Sure.
was something that never left me. And just
Yeah.
this idea that there are families out there having to choose which child is being sold so that they could then provide for the other children within the home. And that stuck with me at that point in time and became a concept that I wanted to learn more about and dig into. And at that time, so I grew up in the church. I'm a pastor's kid. I
Yeah.
married into it again. My husband is a pastor. And so ministry runs thick in our family.
Yes.
And so, I'm grateful for parents that didn't shy away from that conversation and say,
Mm.
"Oh, it's scary, it's pretty
Yeah.
touchy to talk about," but rather they really cultivated an environment where I could explore what that was and ask questions. So as missionaries were coming off the field, I was able to engage with them on this topic. And it was one for me at that point in time. There really were not jobs in human trafficking. It was still a concept that was not talked about. In fact, I was told by very well-intended people in the church that if I talked about human trafficking, I would be trafficked. And that was one where I'm just
That
like,
sounds
okay,
logical.
yeah, right. And so, my personality type, but it was almost like a challenge accepted moment and
Yes.
just grew into it. So I wasn't really sure where trafficking would fit vocationally. Very quickly realized during college and post college that there are not jobs in this field, or at that point in time, there were not many jobs in the field.
No.
It is a growing field, so we are seeing more and more cropping up. At that point in time, it was nearly non-existent,
Mm.
and so grateful again for just the mentors and my parents who really pulled out the strengths in me. And I realized that with my personality type, something like politics, I'm understanding the strategy and the systems at play, and
Yeah.
how can we influence those for freedom, really drove my studies in politics and criminal justice. And then recognizing, okay, there are other components. This is where the team really comes into play, of everyone's different strengths that can be highlighted to do what we do. So anyway, that was a long answer for you, but
No,
that's
you're fine.
my background.
No, that's great. And it's one of the things that I have always just loved about you is you do just have such a deep-seated passion and heart for this problem. And I think what's incredible about you and the team, and even like Amy Thurston, who I know is on the board and we're all very good friends with, is that we have true belief that change can happen. And that happens at so many different levels. And, it goes from the politics and the criminal justice. We often talk about the struggle of, the Johns, the people who are purchasing, the people who are participating, they deserve forgiveness and compassion and empathy just as much as, the victims. And that's, a hard thing for us to grow in. I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But I want to come back around to Nick and your husband. I love Nick. He's hilarious. We've had some great times around the campfire at your house. And one of the things that I've always admired about you guys is just how all in the two of you are for each other. And Nick is in ministry, and I mean, truly you are too, with him and as well as Greenlight. What was it like coming to him at, you guys hadn't been married super long. You founded Greenlight, I think of what, like 25, not even?
I think 23. Yeah, 23. Yep.
What was it like coming to him going, I think I would like to start a nonprofit from the ground up?
Yeah. So now Nick and I, we met, we were your typical ring by springers at Messiah, and we met actually just 2 weeks into my college career. So Nick was a couple years older than I was, and studying cross-cultural ministry, and I came in as a first year, and it was wild how our paths crossed. So his brother was actually there on campus early because he was a transfer. So we were all there for the orientation week. And because Nick and his brother lived about 4 hours from campus, he was also there early just because of, driving and everything else. So yeah, logistics, right? So it worked out that he was actually there during my welcome week at Messiah, which is when they would do all those orientations. And we met very early on, started dating about sometime within that first month, and rest is history. So we were college sweethearts. And Nick, just early on, he knew what was my passion was. We shared really just from it. We were probably a little intense in the approach, but just, it was one of those, we don't want to waste time committing to a relationship and a person if we really are not seeing this aligning in the long term, as far as goals and overall, vision and what God has called us to. And so we both had what really drew us together was just a heart for ministry. And we knew that might change and look different in time, but his passion was through that evangelism and discipleship, and soon, later morphed into, as we worked with young adults and youth, having a heart for that. And mine was trafficking. It was kind of like this idea of, okay, little intense and scary, but he never made me feel like it couldn't be accomplished. In fact, between Nick and my family, they were my biggest cheerleaders and advocates. When at times, I even doubted myself and thought, this is just impossible. There's no way.
I mean, we were a little crazy at the beginning there.
It was a little crazy. It definitely was. And it's like, this can't happen. And I think I became my own worst critic. But he has always championed that. And I think, time together, cultivating that relationship over the similar, missional heartbeat is what we have had and intentionally cultivated in our relationship. to then, our time in prayer together. And there were things that God would speak to me and would speak to Nick separately in our prayer lives. And then when we'd come together and share, hey, you know what, this is what I feel the Lord is sharing. He's not going to pull a husband and wife apart.
For
and
sure. Yeah.
And it was just so confirming and amazing to see how he was confirming things in both of our prayer lives on the various steps that we were taking and Nick's ministry within the church context, and then mine through Greenlight Operation, and how they were really blending together. And it was one of those of like, all right, buckle up, because this is going to happen. And it did. And so I can't say that hasn't, been without its, of course, your sacrifices, and be nice to have a little bit more free time or
Right.
time to relax. Now that can come with the intentionality and prioritizing rest, and we certainly strive to do that. But just super grateful for that's a little bit of our history and what drove him into that then.
Yeah. And you guys, Nick is in youth ministry. And obviously you are doing Greenlight, and there's a lot with that. If anybody has been involved in ministry in any capacity, even if you're not a pastor or pastor's wife or anything, you know that it takes a lot of commitment. And typically, even if it's only one person in the family, kind of quote unquote in ministry, it is a family thing. You have to make sure your schedules are aligned. Oh, you have practice, you have this, you have to be there. Oh, the event starts at 7, but you've got to be there at 5:30 for setup. Like, you're always adding on to, oh, the event may be 3 hours, but we all know it's going to be 7. Like,
Yes. Yep,
and,
exactly.
and building that out. You have one little one, and you have your second one on the way.
Yep.
We are girl mom central over here between the two of us.
Team girl.
How and oh my gosh, so stinking cute too. What has been a challenge as far as adding to your family and still continuing to juggle and, keeping up with the things, really?
Absolutely. So, oh man, the art of delegation has become a necessity, as well as prioritizing. And Nick and I joke, it felt like the first 6 months with Rosemary, she's our first, and as Anna mentioned, we've got the second on the way. We would have almost like a team huddle where it was usually sometime on the weekend. It was like, okay, here is, where we need to have coverage. Okay, you've got a meeting at this time. I've got a meeting at this time. How are we overlapping it? And a true godsend was my parents, who had been living on the western side of the state, moved over toward the York area, which is about 30 minutes from where Nick and I are. So to finally, have family members nearby, grandparents, when Nick and I don't have that ability where both of our schedules are maybe overlapping, where we both have an event one night, and where we both have a meeting and we can't, be there, which doesn't happen all the time. We've been very intentional in how we schedule that. So at least one parent is home. But in those moments when it's unavoidable, it is wonderful to have grandparents nearby who can assist us. And I think being willing to ask for the help when we need it has been huge. Our priorities have certainly changed, and what we considered priorities pre-children and priorities post-children. It's like, oh my goodness, I didn't think I had a lot of extra time, but now that we're living in the life of children and both running our ministries, it's like, wow, okay, we definitely had more time than we ever realized. But really just prioritizing. Communication is huge. For us, we do a lot of calendaring together, and then also calendaring in time of rest, and ensuring that we have, whether it's a Saturday or a specific evening in the week, depending on what is doable, keeping that, just family time, and really, really intentionally guard those moments. So it's a lot of work to work through those wild schedules. They look a little scary, but it's doable, and we've been making it work.
I laugh because when I was on the Greenlight team, I was the first one of us to have kids, and I remember we had a big meeting, and I think it might have been, it wasn't Athena, it had to have been Nora. And you were like, oh, I didn't realize you'd be bringing her. And you weren't mad, but you were just kind of like surprised by it. And I was like, well, we are still breastfeeding and I can't really quite leave her yet. And I think you might have been pregnant with Rosemary. And you thought, oh, that's something that like I'm probably gonna have to think about it coming up here too. And it's fun to not in an told you so way at all, but it's just fun to like watch the team grow and like seeing you go through, just that transition to motherhood and how that's kind of changed you and your interaction with everything. And in some ways it makes working in human trafficking, it drives the passion when you have children. Because I'm sure you and I are familiar with it. Other people listening may be aware of She's Somebody's Daughter. And that concept of that, like, you're not just buying a thing. It's not it's not a product. This is a real human being. And I know, at least for me, when I started working with Greenlight and in anti-human trafficking, that was part of it. I had a daughter and I had a child and I wanted to make a difference. And that saying, you may know, but you can't ever now say, I don't know, and not do anything about it. But were you gonna say something? Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's very true. It is. It definitely adds that layer. Drive.
But along those lines of joy, bundles of joy here, what are some things that have just brought you joy in working with human trafficking? Because it's such a dark and sketch topic that people want to avoid. They don't realize how much joy there can be in it.
Yeah, no, it really can be. And, one of the things recently we've been challenging people with is it's very easy to get caught in the numbers and the statistics, looking at, there was a recent update of the number of estimated, victims worldwide. They're looking at 49.6 million victims, which is just a massive jump from where we were at 40.3 million. And with that, we're seeing less than 1% are now being rescued, where previously the Department of State estimated 1% were being rescued. So those numbers can definitely be challenging. And I know we get the question of, at times, is it worth it? Do you feel like you can actually invoke change and do and make a difference? And my answer is always yes, because even though those numbers can feel overwhelming, each one of those numbers represents a life, and we have to start with the one. And we've got that motto, and Anna, you're very familiar with it, of we put into the one what we would the thousands. And so when we have that one person who reaches out during a seminar, or as a result of a seminar, or a teacher comes forward and says that they recognize that a child that they have in their classroom is displaying signs of being groomed and seasoned, and they're starting to pick up on signs that previously were not being recognized because they weren't educated on the topic. Those are huge victories where, yes, it can be overwhelming to see the research, see the statistics, to actually be present when there is a survivor that is going through her story and sharing the deep pain. There's a lot of hurt. In this industry, there can be a lot of what we call secondary trauma or vicarious trauma that happens to those who are caring for the individuals that have been exploited, because the topic is dark. The content and what you're dealing with is very, very dark. And that's something we work to safeguard our team from, and myself, and just even, how do I compartmentalize this? How do I process it? Now, while there is a lot of darkness and there can be discouragement, when you have those victories of, okay, that seminar made a difference because that student was recognized, or, that booth that we had at this community event allowed for this victim to realize that there are resources available to her and she can get help. And I've got actually a jar up in my room that was given to me by a survivor advocate of just, it was so sweet. After some interaction and working with her, she hand wrote little notes of encouragement of just, thankfulness for having been able to work with her and share her story and things like that. And I look at that jar, I keep it in my bedroom, and it's one of those things of, we don't always get to know where that person ends up. We just play a part in their story. But to have those little moments and, even just for that one person to express that sort of gratitude, it makes it all worth it. So.
Yeah, I've worked with some victims or survivors, I should say, really. In recent months, there was one we actually had, she was coming and helping me as a mother's helper. And we, along with, well, really Hope, Inspire, Love, and then we helped get her some stuff for her first apartment. And, you know, people don't realize that there are so many successes, and there really are just so many joys. There is joy in events, right? We have so much fun at events.
We did.
And just seeing people's heart and excitement, and, you know, people feel like it is hopeless. They're overwhelmed by the numbers, that they can't do something. And then they realize they can do something, like come to the art fest and buy beautiful art from local artisans. And they're like, I can do that.
Yes.
Or, you know, the Run for Restoration, I can hand out water bottles, right? And it's exciting when you see people have that realization that something that feels so silly and so little can have a lasting impact and really make an impact to what you're doing and the work that's happening here in central Pennsylvania. But of course, with joys, there are challenges. What is something that has been really challenging for you working in human trafficking?
Challenging. I think, oh goodness. I think just keeping the main thing, you know, of why do we do what we do? And again, to that point of the numbers can feel overwhelming and focusing on that one. But I think celebrating the small victories as much as you celebrate the big victories are huge. And especially with an issue that can be so heavy. And so I think, let's see, areas is, I would say maybe some discouragement at times can be when, you know, you're working with a law enforcement official and they're denying that human trafficking is happening within their region. When you're well aware of victims that have come forward from those specific areas. And so whether it's something like outright denial that it's happening and almost this, I want to bury my head in the sand. Or sometimes too, a survivor that you engage with who, well, I guess since they're not willing to leave, they would still be considered a victim, but a victim who's not willing to leave their trafficker, whether that be as a result of Stockholm syndrome or the idea that, you know, there's nothing better for me beyond this. I'm used to it, at least. I know it's coming to me, whereas the unknown's maybe a little bit more scary. Or service providers have failed them in the past because they didn't have the consistent services that were needed, or it didn't go as deep into meeting those specific needs of what's required, which is why we're super, super intentional about building a good foundation for a restoration home and program, so that, you know, we recognize we're going to make mistakes too, but we want to ensure that we're considering the full scope of a person. There's so many different elements that make a person who they are, especially then too, when we're trying to help rebuild that personhood and deal with the trauma at the same time. A lot to consider. So anyway, I think those are probably some recent ones that we have gone through. Just sometimes that denial that it's happening, or someone not wanting to help, and you're like, it's right here, just take it.
We're showing you, we have the information, we have the people. We're not kidding. This isn't something to joke about. Like, you can't make it up. How has working in Greenlight Operation and just human trafficking in general, how do you feel like that's really impacted your faith in the last few years?
Oh goodness. I think as far as faith, for me, watching this process of growing Greenlight has really been a faith builder, because there are times when what next steps are needed, essentially, they're so out of my hands, where it's like, Lord, we have got to pay for this and we need the money. I don't know who to go to for this. You know, at the time of starting Greenlight, I was 23 years old. I didn't have a broad network of
no seed money there.
business owners. I was dirt poor. Like, I'm like, Lord, where is this coming from? But those are truly the moments when we can't do it and it's beyond our capacity, where we get to see how God works and he provides. And, you know, Nick, man, he is such an encourager. Those moments when I'm frustrated, I'm like, oh man, I want to get to this next stage. We need, you know, $50,000. I don't know where it's going to come from. We just got, you know, denied for a grant or whatever it might be. And just having that person, whether it's a spouse or a close friend, mentor, whatever that might be, I would just encourage you guys to have like someone who's encouraging you, because that for me is Nick. And he's just like, Jordan, look at what God has provided. This is his ministry. He's not going to let it fail. We're going to keep being faithful in what he's called us to be faithful in. But where God needs to do God's work, we let him do it and we don't force his hand. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, and for doers, that is so hard.
Which is the hardest part for us. Yes.
It's so hard, but it's like, all right, yep, I've done what needs to be done. Now it's just waiting and just and seeking the Lord. And I've shared this recently with some people. I'm glad that God didn't answer our prayer a few years ago to have a home when we wanted it, because I don't think we would have been ready or realized either the magnitude of work that goes into it. I just think back to myself of who I was 3 years ago, and there was that passion, that zeal, but I have learned so much in 3 years that I didn't know then.
For sure.
Had we had the home and opened it when we were wanting to, I don't think our community was ready. I don't think our volunteers were ready, our team, myself. And so like, all right, God, yeah, you definitely know what you're doing. Thank you.
Having been part of that core team, I was thinking about that myself as you were getting ready to talk. And I was talking to somebody else. They were asking about the restoration home. And I had the same thought. I probably drove you crazy saying we're operating in harvest here. Like, we could wake up tomorrow and somebody is bequeathing us their grandma's home and like we have a home. And so it wasn't totally not a bad line of thinking to have. And I think that it was a very realistic thought. We know organizations that has happened to. But I completely agree with that. I think God's timing is just always perfect. And whether that is meeting your spouse at the right time when they're not supposed to be there, that's how Ethan and I actually kind of crossed paths again.
That's wild.
Yeah, he was on campus moving his sister in. He wasn't even supposed to be on campus. And I was getting ready to start student teaching. I wasn't supposed to be on campus. I just was like filling out paperwork and we crossed. Anyway, God's timing is just always better. And he knows our needs. He knows where we need to grow. And he knows where, the team needs to grow and changes that need to be made in all of us and dynamics. And one of the coolest things for me looking, kind of back and forward right now is one of our interns, one of my first babies is now in my position as the operations coordinator, which just warms my heart more than I can tell you. That's always kind of the goal, is to bring up and, have the next ones kind of pass on the mantle to a degree. And so it's just been a true joy and privilege to see all of that happening since I stepped back to go back to teaching more. And then almost right after that happened, of course, I laugh now, you guys got the restoration home. So I would love for you to tell us a bit about that. Tell us some of those needs and kind of where we're at right now with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oh man, it was wild. So as we think back to the past few years and what the real estate market looked like, what life in general has looked like, starting a nonprofit in 2018.
I forgot about the nightmare that was COVID, honestly.
Oh, yeah. It out. It was wild. It was wild. So we launched in May of 2018. Actually, we're going to come up on our 5-year anniversary here very soon. And so when we launched, of course, nobody's anticipating a pandemic. We launched into a capital campaign wanting to raise funds for the restoration home. And then also, of course, it's one thing to purchase. It's another thing to have the program fully developed and ready to go.
Right.
And we of course hit COVID. Not too long after that, real estate market was insane. And so this house is truly a miracle house. While we did not have a home that was just given to us, we were praying for that. Oh my goodness, we were praying for it and hoping we'd have a home that would just be given, or somebody would just write out a check and say, here you go. But I think it taught us grit and stamina and what it looks like to, to budget and steward funds by raising that, throughout that few year period. And so it was actually a Sunday afternoon after church. I got a text message from one of our volunteers that said, Jordan, this house just hit the market. It is beautiful. You should consider looking at it for the restoration home. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe. And I'm like, I'm looking at it and I start looking at it a little bit more. My jaw's like starting to drop. I'm like, this is literally checking all of the boxes that we had. And just, praying. And I'm like, all right, Lord, if this is a home for us, this is now at the heat of the market. We were post the quarantine season. And this was May of, or actually the time we would have seen it would have been April of 2022.
22, yeah.
And one of those we were really in the heat of this insane real estate market. So it's almost like you don't want to get your hopes up too much because houses were going in for multiple bids and offers. And while it might
That's when we were house searching, isn't that?
It's crazy. Yeah, it was just wild. It's almost like this. I don't want to get too excited. We did have to take out a mortgage on it, which is okay. We had enough for a great down payment and it's a sustainable amount and everything else. But we were having to work then through a commercial loan process, which in a competitive market, to have something that takes a little bit longer of a process, to sellers, they're a little bit uneasy. And so it was a wild story. God was all through it. The sellers really thought there would be a lot of other offers and bids because for the size of the home, they started relatively low. And we committed that we were not going to go over what that price was. We wanted it the asking price. And we're like, Lord, if this is it, let it stay here. We can't get into this bidding more and so on and so forth. And so it was a process. It was not, I can't say it was like, wow, super easy and it was a breeze. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of like, oh my goodness, is this actually going to work out? And it did. There were no other offers that came forward. We got the bid. Anyway, it all worked out. So we buy the house. Since we've purchased the home, we've had 14 teams come out to volunteer and serve within our restoration home, which is we're counting up how many participants were to each work day. We're looking at about 275 to 300 volunteers. It's amazing coming in from all over the place, including out of state. We've had some Maryland groups and Ohio groups, some from all over Pennsylvania. We completed courses with the Institute for Shelter Care, which is it's a national group that essentially specializes in equipping organizations to launch shelters that serve survivors of sex trafficking. And some of those shelters might be short-term, some might be long-term, some may serve children, women, men. They have, something for everybody and are really investing in those foundational elements, which is huge. So completed that. That was 180 hours of in-person training.
Yes, it was.
It was amazing. Went through that. And so now where we are is we are finalizing our capital campaign. We're working to raise $435,000 so that we can bring on the right staff, finish our renovations. And the reality is survivors are going to cost money. We get the home ready, we get the program ready, but survivors are going to need food. They're going to need clothing. They're going to need the utilities within the home. When they are showering, nobody wants to take a cold shower or without heat. So these are all things that these funds will be going toward. And so that'll be launching, or our hope is that we'll launch the home in 2024, if we are meeting our fundraising goals. And there's some more exciting things that'll be coming down the pike that folks will be seeing here soon. But we also have the Run for Restoration happening on May 20th. And we're really excited about that. That'll all go toward the home as well.
Yeah. And the Art Fest is in the fall, like usual?
So we actually discontinued the art festival. I know, sad day. It was a phenomenal event, but we recognized coming out of COVID and just essentially as we recognized the return for the amount of time and everything going into it, we decided to redirect that event into a gala. So that will be happening in October. We had our first one this past October. We're looking forward to our second one coming up here in the fall as well. So you guys can stay tuned for that.
Yeah, wonderful. I will have links in the show notes all about the restoration home. I know that you guys have a wish list. I will make sure that wish list is posted. Please make sure that you follow Greenlight Operation on Facebook, Instagram. I'll have all of those posts there. Jordan, always great to chat with you. The last quick question that I have, because the podcast is called Let's Have a Cuppa, I know that you and I have this in common often. what is your favorite thing to have in your cup?
Oh goodness, coffee. I'm sorry, it's not tea, even though we're going with a cuppa, but
Okay.
oh goodness, I love a good cup of coffee. Lately it's been mochas. I've been on like a chocolate craze. So
Yeah.
pregnancy, who knows? Maybe that'll change.
Yes,
But love a good
our
cup of
team's
coffee.
always been coffee people, so I'm not surprised by that answer at all.
Figured it's my survival juice. I live on it.
God bless. God bless. The
Yeah,
Lord bless the person who like was given the inspiration to grind some beans up. That's all I'm
so
saying.
true. So true.
Jordan, thank you again for coming on and chatting with me. It is an honor and a privilege to call you a friend and a colleague, and just to continue to see the extraordinary work that you are doing.
Well, it's so good to see you, Anna. Always love catching up and connecting. And thank you too to everyone who's listened. And if you guys have any questions or want to check out Greenlight Operation, as Anna mentioned, there will be some links and we would love to connect.
Alrighty, thanks guys. Have a wonderful week. Bye.